Good evening, everybody. John Black here, coming to you from Anzac House. I do trust you can hear me. I'm sitting here with Mon, who's the producer of the webinar this evening, and she will be undertaking production to make sure that that you can hear me all the time and I'm responding to the questions when we come to that. So for some of you, it might be the first time you've participated in a webinar, but importantly for this particular item is for me to listen to your feedback. When I say listen, of course, it's coming through in writing, but I will repeat the questions so everyone can hear them and I can respond. The best way for us to be able to do this is for me to segment the presentation and then go through those questions during those pauses. Because it's important that I get to those points. Now, this presentation this evening is actually very much at the tail end, if you like, of the consultation on the strategic plan. The purpose obviously is to receive feedback from the members. It's most important that you remember that this is a plan for the future of RSL in New South Wales, but as a member-based organisation, it's important that we get the support of the membership to both agree to the plan and then, of course, support its implementation. Now, point here also is that what we need to be able to do is for me to demonstrate to the board that here is the final plan. It's incorporating members' feedback, but also I need to design a way that we can fund the plan. And probably some questions about that because it's been certainly a hot topic of discussion, particularly as we approach a board election, which is underway now. I can say, I'm just reaching across the table here, that the final version of the plan is in draft mode. Obviously, as I said, this is the tail end of the consultation sequence, and in many ways it's been impacted significantly by the COVID impact, and that is unfortunate, but we've been working whether through webinars or getting the members' feedback through the website, or indeed continuing with some sub-branch consultations, although with limited numbers. The call to action tonight is that I encourage everyone to provide feedback on the website, notwithstanding the questions I get tonight, to make sure that I'm really taking into account, as I said, importantly, members' feedback. According to Tracy in my office, I've visited over 90 locations, sub-branches, but that's included well over 100 sub-branches. So I think it's fair to say that it's been a good cross-section of feedback I've received, but never a week goes past where someone doesn't raise something I haven't thought of before. And certainly, as I said, it's important that we consider everyone's feedback. So I do encourage you at the end of the presentation to provide your feedback if you can onto the website, and I'll cover where that is in the presentation this evening. Okay, so the scope, I'll briefly touch a little bit about background, and not a great deal, and then I'll give a quick brief overview of the plan because I'm assuming most of you would have had a chance to read it. I'll just highlight some of the key features, and then in particular, although I'll be taking questions throughout the presentation, to get into open Q&A at the end of the session this evening. Okay. The plan itself. Okay, in terms of background, the draft plan was much underpinned by the research that was done in the years leading up to 2019 Congress. That was research that was done by a company called SVA, Social Ventures Australia. It was engaged by RSL New South Wales State Branch to undertake a series of quantitative and qualitative research, quantitative being survey, and then qualitative it ran quite a few workshops with members. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see there was a whole series of data that was collected and enables us to particularly look at that and say what needs to be addressed in the sense of the future of the RSL. So that was important to know. 2019 Congress, I just started in the role. I've been here just over a year now, so that was obviously very important for me as the first opportunity for me to listen to the membership. Obviously, sub-branch is represented by delegates, a lot of people with a lot of experience with the RSL, so I was all ears. Now, what I would say is there's been three particular things I took away from Congress that are important that underpin the plan. One is overwhelmingly the delegates said they wish the RSL to remain a charity. Secondly, they said overwhelmingly, again it was unanimous, that we wish to remain a member-based organisation. And third thing, which I'll talk about briefly, is I left Congress with this underlying feeling that the organisation lost its trust in the strategic leadership, which is something we've addressed significantly over the last 12 months. Let me just backtrack there on those things. In demonstrating what it meant to be a charity, it was clear in that process that if one chose to be a charity, it has implications for a member-based charity, in so much as the law since 2012 with the setup of the new regulator, the Australian Charities Not-for-Profits Commission, is that by definition a member cannot obtain a benefit from a charity. However, and this is a very important point, is that in the RSL, a member is a veteran. Now, our charitable purpose in our charitable deed is to support all veterans and their families. So by virtue of being a member and a veteran, if you are a veteran and you are in need, it's perfectly legitimate and acceptable to obtain a benefit from the RSL. Now, benefit sometimes people think is very much a financial benefit. However, I think one of the greatest strengths of the organisation, notwithstanding its long history, is its membership by virtue of camaraderie, sharing experience, and probably most importantly is supporting each other, because from time to time as ex-servicemen and women, we reach out for that support, and that is something we should be proud of, and it certainly underpins the plan in terms of what we can do for the future. So those two important things are very important to remember, and very important to understand also from a strategic leadership point of view, that the board of RSL New South Wales is accountable for all the sub-branches. So when sometimes unpopular decisions are made, we've got to understand the context of those. But the strategic plan is about setting up the future. I do mention the third point being the trust issue. A lot of that was coming about from the judicial inquiries that occurred, the Bergen inquiry, and also what's probably not as well understood across the league is the investigations undertaken by the Australian Charities Not-for-Profits Commission, which enforced, that is a legal enforcement of corrective action that was required, which really was, in a nutshell, changing the RSL from a committee structure, what was called a state council, to a governing board under the law of the land. So quite a significant change, because I think culturally we saw that committee structure, the state council, as representing members, which understood would be quite true, to a situation now where as a director of RSL New South Wales, your primary accountability and responsibility is to the company, i.e. RSL New South Wales. So it's not a representative role per se. So that's important to understand in terms of the context of the strategic plan and where we go forward. Okay, what I'll do now is talk about the preparation for the case for change. Now, what is attached to the front of the plan there is a synopsis, a two-page synopsis on the case for change. Why do we need a strategic plan, and what is that, and why make changes in the RSL? Well, through the narrative there, what's prominent, of course, is the ageing membership. Now, a year ago, the average age of the membership was 77, 78, so we could actually express that probably now getting closer to 80 average age, with only 1,000 members under the age of 55. So if, and certainly this strategic plan proposes will remain member-based, we need to do something to address that, obviously. So that's an example. Next point I'd draw out is that it's not clear within the membership or the greater community what the RSL stands for. And I think that came about through the research as well. It was unclear. A lot of brand confusion because the research told us that most Australians, not just in New South Wales, see the RSL and they associate the RSL with the club, the RSL. They don't understand there's a sub-branch, as a charity, and a club are both separate entities. So that's something that we have to address again in the plan. I think it's fair to say since the turn of the last century, we have seen an absolute proliferation of other ex-service organisations, many of them charities. Soldier On, Eyes Front, Swiss 8, the list goes on. According to the Department of Defence, there are over 4,500 other registered charities now that say that their purpose is to look after veterans. In New South Wales alone, we're able to identify 450, and you'll see that in the plan, 450 other charities to support veterans. And the case for change says, why has this happened? Because with my view, not only is the RSL 100 years old and steeped in history and tradition, it has the resources, the means and the will to be the leading charity for veterans. And that now becomes a key focus, I think, in the future, and obviously underpins the strategic plan as well. We should be the leader. We've got to mobilise the resources we've got to do that. I've got in here as well in the case for change, one of the things about being a member-based organisation is we can uniquely provide that opportunity of face-to-face camaraderie and support. I don't believe, while the stats and data tells us that many younger veterans are engaged on social media platforms, I don't believe they're necessarily going to get the same level of camaraderie and support as they're going to get by becoming part of a sub-branch community. And I think we're in a bit of a tipping point now. It's interesting through this COVID period, seeing some of the great challenges of mental health and the like, is that we as a member-based organisation to come to the fore. So that case for change, I think, is strong, and we've got to really celebrate that and start to demonstrate to younger people the benefits of actually joining an organisation. And remember, joining a charity is not to get a benefit, but you're joining to help others. And that's something I think we could really draw upon. I talked about the case for change is that an observation around fragmented leadership. I mentioned about the trust and strategic leadership. Well, I think we've got to get beyond that. We've got to now get behind a plan for the RSL in New South Wales collectively, and certainly we've got to have healthy debate about where direction should be. But as we know from military service, once the decision's made, we get right behind it and make it happen, working together. And that's a key theme, is again, you'll see come out in the proposed plan. How do we work together to achieve our charitable purpose and put us back as a leadership role? We've got drawn out there, which I've copped a fair bit of criticism about, is an observation that a lot of the resources, the wealth of the organisation is held by a few, and obviously how do we then mobilise those resources to help all? And that is quite a contentious point, and perhaps we'll come to that when we look at how we fund the strategic plan. I did call out something that I don't think has been one sub-branch consultation I've been to that hasn't been raised, the Queensland Lottery. Now you'll see in the final version of the plan about how do we, it's in the draft version about alternative ways for raising revenue to support our purpose, but Queensland has obviously stolen the march. Interesting enough, New South Wales was invited to join the lottery in 1957 and chose not to, and certainly the President and I have been to Queensland a number of times trying to negotiate a position on the lottery. That's a matter now for the national RSL to debate, but it's important that you know that that lottery is very successful. It's approximately about $70 million a year coming in. Now, yes, they are supporting veterans across the country, but ostensibly the main focus from that benefit is into Queensland. So that's been called out in the case for change. We need to think about, again, mobilising our resources, or as one of the options is for us to become part of RSL Queensland. We can talk about that later. The last point about the case for change was to get on with it, was to get over this issue of trust. the transparency that's come about in the last 12 months, whether it's reports from every board meeting, whether it's all the financial reports, even the directors' expenses month by month are up on the website. Everything is on the website. You can see money coming in and money going out for the support fund for the disasters, for instance, and that's something we've got to continue to do. We've got to build trust and confidence with the membership. That this small office is here to support everyone, and there's obviously a lot we can do and a lot more we will do. Okay, the last point, obviously the draft plan came about as I've discussed. It was drafted by myself. It's taken into account, as I said, those inputs, but most importantly has been the last journey around this consultation to get feedback in. Okay, I might just take a quick pause there and see if any questions have come in before we go to the next part. What have we got here? Oh, first one, how will it be funded? We might just wait for that one because I will address a little bit about the funding issue later on in the presentation. How will it's not my strategic plan, it's our strategic plan, help current serving members once discharged from service? Now that's a really good point. That's come through in the consultation. Again, I will answer that question a little bit further down the track because we need to look at the current plan, and I'll be interested in your views if we've done enough to address around the current serving people. Why was there not a single female representative for director's position on the board? Good question. Look, obviously it's voluntary. People put their hand up. We didn't know who was nominating for the board, and no one nominated. Now, with the women making up about 15% of the current Defence Force, in fact, it's a bit higher than that, I think now. I'm thinking that that will change in the not too distant future, and there's some fantastic women out there. One featured on our latest edition of Ravelli. It's up to us. I think we've got to encourage more younger people to join, and I will address that, how we intend to do it, which comes back to that other question. It's a very good question about the current serving and more recent veterans. Some sub-branches do not want to change or want to do anything except meet monthly. Yeah, well, I'm afraid they're going to have to change if they want to remain relevant. I think it's something we've got to take head on. We've got to be truthful about this. If we don't change, unfortunately, as I said in Albury last year, the option of closing down with dignity is there on the table. I don't want that to happen. I think the RSL can be renewed, and it can not only stand for veterans and their families, but can also be the leader in the community and amongst all the ex-service organisations. As I said, we've got the resources. It's a question of mobilising it, putting any self-interest aside, and moving together as one. And I'm excited about that. There's no doubt that obviously there are groups that want to go back and just do it the way it was. That's fine. It's a member-based organisation. The decision will have to be made. But I'd like to think that the positive means of change and supporting change will prevail, and we'll see through the final version of the strategic plan a real sense of a future, a strong future for the RSL. And as I said, it will reassert itself as the most dominant and the leader of all ESOs. That's not to say and to denigrate any of the other ones. Quite frankly, you could argue that the reason why the RSL has declined in terms of observations, particularly with younger people, is it hasn't been offering what they've been seeking. So we can address that, and we will. Okay, so my next part of the presentation is to do a website tour. So let me just get this right here. I'm just going to my live website. No, that's not it. Let's see here. So that's the home page. That will change actually soon because we're going to more of an externally focused web page. But needless to say, the strategic plan's on the front cover. You would have noticed under the members tab, a lot of items of news. Obviously the board election underway now is very prominent, and I think as of this morning about just under 500 people have already cast their vote electronically, so that's good to know. Annual reports, financial statements are there. Again, comes back to the transparency. You can see a lot of information you might not have seen about here before. The board communique. Every board meeting, you can see the outcomes of each of the board meeting, what's happened, key decisions, and so forth that have occurred. Going down, oops, I'll go back one more page. You can see more things that you can see around board documentation. This is the director's expenses are on there, event transparency, and so forth. Circulars, information that goes out, a lot of that's in the news tab as well. There is a lot of repetition on the website, and I'm grateful for any feedback on how we can make it better, and we'll continue to do so. Lots of information on here. Here is the enforceable undertakings by the ACNC, the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. This is the document that really compelled some significant changes in governance. Like it tells us we must have a company secretary, we must have a lawyer, and things like that to remain registered as a charity. But today we're focusing on the strategic plan. So I'll go back up to the top, open that up. There's a number of versions of the plan here. One is the colour one, one's the one for printing. So it's a black and white, so you can print it off. Now, any information and submit documents is here, and you can provide your feedback by emailing it to that email address. There is a lot of feedback already on there. You can click here and look at it. Interesting stuff. I noticed one person said we don't need values, which really surprised me, because I think values do certainly underpin the behaviour of the organisation, but more particularly I think younger people are looking for an organisation that really lives its values and demonstrates its values. So that was certainly interesting feedback for me. Strategic plan budget. Often people ask me, what's the cost? Goodness gracious, don't look at that. There's a lot of detail in there. Each of the 49 initiatives in the plan has milestones and budget attached. Now, I must say this is an estimate. You'll see in the final version of the plan a little bit more clarity around the process by which a project, which is a group of initiatives, would come together, and how the estimate will become, I guess, a lot finer tuned, and budget will be allocated to each project. But that's approximately $20 million plus a $3 million contingency over 5 years, and that's obviously quite prominent on the website. This is probably quite important for those who have an interest in how we organise ourselves. The report coming from the board from a strategy decision around the 6th of February of this year talked about how we organise ourselves, and there's been quite a lot of discussion around some of the sub-branches around that, and how we might actually organise ourselves as a decentralised model. That is, you might have what I call a franchise model with one large sub-branch in Sydney, for instance, picking up a number of non-contiguous geographically other sub-branches and supporting them, to one where you might have a district model and so forth. But when you applied the principles, it was clear that with one brand, consistency of performance and consistency of service is what people transitioning out of the ADF will have the same experience everywhere. We needed some degree of centralised model. Now, one of the options in this paper, and we've been very transparent about it, is that we could close Anzac House here and move directly under RSL Queensland. I mentioned before the advantages of access to a rather large revenue source through the lottery, but when I've been to sub-branches, there's an overwhelming no to that. They prefer to see a very strong and collaborative RSL New South Wales before moving into a sphere of one RSL across Australia at this point. So I really suggest that people have an interest to read those papers. And there's some Congress presentations around, particularly some background there around the research. So quite a lot on the website. What I'll do now is I had no intention of actually going through each of the, I'll go find the right page, each of the initiatives, but just briefly, you can see the case for change, which I've spoken about. What will successful look like? This is a description if we implement the strategic plan, or this is the draft one, what would look like 5 years from now. And you can see there it's very uplifting, being prominent in leadership. We have a concept where the sub-branch is at the centre of our services, and the services are about connecting with veterans and then making sure they get access to the services that can help them. It's about that camaraderie, it's about getting together, it's about playing into sub-branch sport and recreation and activities. It's about really changing the focus so we can, as I said, release the resources we've got and make it exciting and relevant to not only the current generations but future generations, and attracting younger members, not only to provide the volunteer support we need, but to support our older members. As we know, we've got quite a few senior older members, and wouldn't it be great to have a bunch of young people coming in and helping them support them? That's the future, and that's what this is about. So it talks about the purpose, the vision. I think it's easy to look at the motto there, one RSL acting together, delivering locally. As I said, the sub-branches are at the centre, and certainly had some feedback that I need to make that more prominent in the final version of the plan. There are 7 goals in the draft. This stage, that probably come down to 6 goals, compressing some things in the final version of the plan, and that's from feedback so far. They're the values. I think, as I said, this is going to be really important for us in the future, particularly about promoting the organisation. What do we stand for? How do we behave? You can see the words there. I think they're not unfamiliar to anyone who's served. Teamwork, service, courage, commitment, it's there, and that's what we'd like to see across our membership. And by and large, that's what I see. So I think we've got to live those values. So, as I said, 49 initiatives. So initiative, what needs to be done, and then correspondingly what success would look like once that's implemented. I won't go into that level of detail through this webinar, but what I'll do is nip down to this conceptual diagram, which is at the back of the plan, which depicts, here we are, depicts the sub-branch at the centre, but over on the left-hand side you can see current serving people, veterans, veteran being defined, anyone who's served in the ADF, and of course we also within the RSL take into account those certain allies with us. This is important. We, in the detail in the plan, say we've got to work closer with clubs. There was some argument saying we should divorce our clubs because of the brand issue, that is the association in the community that they see the RSL as a club, not the sub-branch. But rather than say no, put the clubs aside, divorce them, they can't use the name RSL, all that sort of stuff. No, they're a pillar of the community, so we need to work out how we better engage, but also tell the community what's the difference between a sub-branch and a club, and that's what we need to do, and that's what's demonstrated in the plan. The concept, now I'll talk through these parts because, as I said, the sub-branch are doing these 4 things. It really is at the centre of what we do and what we stand for as the RSL. Camaraderie, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Events are here in the more detailed part of the plan. It talks about the sport and inter-sub-branch activity. I've been trying to get that going, but it's a bit difficult with COVID, and obviously with the focus on the election at the moment, it's a bit distracting. But we are starting with Veterans Health Week. We've got some events happening coming up. We've got North Bondi versus Coogee in some activities, and we'll start to see how this will pan out. There's a lot of younger people who want to participate, but also running events like lawn bowls, barefoot lawn bowls, bocce and things like that, at all ages and participation. It's about bringing the families in and having fun. Meetings, we've got to do meetings, but generally what we see in the research is that younger veterans don't want to go to meetings. But we know we have to conduct meetings. A lot of sub-branches are managing significant resources and they need the direction and coordination and so forth and so on. But you don't perhaps need a meeting once every month, every second month, and concentrating more on those activities we're doing in the community and engaging with the veterans. The next dot point about the concierge service is probably the biggest, I guess, material change in the way we operate. What I've discovered both from the research and talking to members is if I take the example of pension officers, right, the onerous training requirements now and their accountability requirements means that we've got fewer people volunteering to be a pensions advocate. So what the plan is proposing over the next 5 years is we transition to full-time paid advocates, and that's through these service providers below the line, and I'll talk about that shortly. So what we're proposing is that we develop a catalogue of services. Now, this catalogue initially will be New South Wales. Obviously, there's some ambitions that we have regards this, but essentially developed by the RSL for the RSL. So a sub-branch member gets trained how to use it, becomes a veteran sponsor in this draft version. That wasn't a very well received term. So what you'll see in the final version of the plan is a wellbeing support officer, which is actually also an ATDP trained person. It's not welfare, but it is someone who can connect someone with the services that are available. And this is where, for instance, that we don't necessarily, I think I've got here 450 other organisations, obviously I couldn't put them all on here, how we can connect them to them. So, for instance, I mentioned pensions. They could go to defence care, claims and advocacy, the welfare support and homelessness. Now, that's really important. I think as our primary charity that we support RSL Defence Care with proudly with our logo and trademark is what we need to do for those sort of services. But at the moment, I'm still discovering where I am in New South Wales that people don't know what Defence Care do, and they don't realise that they're accessible for every sub-branch. So there's work to be done there, but that's easy. We've got perhaps someone needs a job. When my previous role, I was the CEO of TAFE, and we set up this Ranks to Recognition program where the New South Wales government funds it. And if you serve and you transition out and you realise that what you did in the services hasn't been recognised in a civilian equivalent, TAFE will sort that up to diploma level and also potentially in some of the degree space as well. And also New South Wales government funds the gap training. So you haven't quite got enough experience and skill set to have a full qualification recognised, they will do the gap. The Office of Veterans Affairs is a Veterans Employment Program into the public sector. It's an award-winning program which helps people get with me, private sector company. Similar, they connect veterans with experience, and particularly around cyber security, IT type things, but a wider range, and they can connect them. We probably don't know that about as sub-branch members, but once we get the catalogue, we'll be able to connect people in need. Further, through the consultation period, it's come clear to me that whilst we can connect to services, the other thing I think potentially we can do is similar to when you're serving, if you get posted from point A to point B, when you arrive in a new location with your family, you connect with a defence community organisation that can introduce you to your school, the shops and all that sort of stuff, local amenities. We can do that for people who've transitioned. So the question got asked before about people transitioning is in the last budget, earlier this month, the government formally announced the setup of the Joint Transition Authority, which is joining, it's responding through the Productivity Commission report actually to how we improve the transition experience for defence people, about 6,000 a year, of which around 2,000 are coming to New South Wales, is you're joining Department of Defence, ADF, with DVA. So sitting in the middle will be the Joint Transition Authority, which will have the accountability to make sure that people are prepared to leave the service and move into their next phase of their career. Now, when I've been to Canberra a number of times on this, and it's clear to me that the Joint Transition Authority wishes to connect with all ESOs, and I'm arguing no. I think the RSL is a truly national organisation with a footprint that covers every square inch of the nation. We should be the lead ESO. And you'd be pleased to know we've made some pretty positive progress in that regard, using our advocacy and lobbying capabilities. And certainly we've got DVA on board, and we're getting closer to working with the Department of Defence in the setup of that to have a better connection. And if you go back to what I just said about people leaving the services and connecting into their community, if a sub-branch is doing that through our network, boy oh boy, have we got a strong, compelling case, because this is about people, this is about families, this is about connecting them. And remember, our purpose is veterans. So yes, they might not be a member, but if they have a good experience in joining or getting connected to their sub-branches, helping them settle into their new community, we can go forward. Interesting enough, Nambucca sub-branch, Nambucca Head sub-branch has been doing a similar thing to this very successfully up there on the north coast, and we can learn a lot from that, and you'll see that come through in the catalogue. I won't talk too much more about that. I hope you've got the gist of what I'm talking about. It is about engaging other ESOs. I think we've got to be very mindful of that. If they're providing a service that we're not, we need to be able to connect people to them that could benefit. There has been some changes in the last 6 months regarding RSL-related entities, and particularly the acquisition of Defence Care by RSL Life Care. I use the term euphemistically, own RSL Life Care. It is a charity itself. It is a not-for-profit. However, it is an organisation that we obviously appoint the board, or more particularly make sure its constitution aligns with its deeds. And over the last 6 months, we've done some changes there to make sure it focuses on supporting veterans. And you might have seen in the news today, we've been successful in obtaining a $5 million grant for a veterans centre based in Nowra. And I think the model that we've come up with there, we'll be able to replicate across other parts of New South Wales. So stand by for that if we support the strategic plan. All right, what I'll do is quickly touch on how we fund it. Now, in this draft plan, we went out for consultation around this concept for funding. Now, I've learned in my life that you don't try to take assets off sub-branches. So this was around a non-compulsory type approach, where instead of them individually investing and paying fees for funds to be invested or managed, we put them into a single pool. The relationship is with the funding entity. RSL New South Wales itself is not managing the funds, and that was clear in the concept, although some people misinterpreted that, but I probably should have made that clearer. The issue there is that we can make significant savings by having the funds pool managed rather than each individual sub-branch paying fees for both managing the funds and obviously the expenses associated with in and out and so forth and trading. So the idea there is, and this is probably the biggest challenge, is around disbursements, where the investors are assisting on the decision making around disbursements, because what we need to do at the strategic level is say we need to fund the strategic plan, we need to fund full-time paid secretaries at each district, we need to fund a liaison officer at the Centre for Veterans Health, we need to fund a software platform to support accounting in each of the sub-branches and so forth. That's where those decisions can be made before disbursements going back to as I said, to sub-branches that own the funds and they remain on the balance sheet. So based on this model, we can certainly, as I said, mobilise the resources collectively across New South Wales and sharply focus on what we are about in terms of delivering the strategic plan and other things. So happy to take any questions on that. At the moment, this concept has not been supported by a funding working group that we set up under the District President's Council. However, I have in the last couple of weeks gone more broadly to the market to see if the concept could work, and it's overwhelmingly yes. And most likely what will happen is that depending obviously on board decisions, I will need to be able to demonstrate how it will be set up and as I said, make sure that it remains voluntary, but have such a compelling case that all sub-branches will want to participate and realise the dream of the strategic plan. Okay, I will then go back to the presentation and take questions, I think, at this point. So I'm going to take a quick pause there. Right, where are we going? What is stopping New South Wales from running their own lottery? Good question, often asked. You're probably aware that it's a different scale of lotteries, from raffles through to multi-million-dollar things. But unfortunately, in Australia, with Tattersalls, Tabcorp and the like owning the licences, it's probably upwards of I'd say $500 million to $1 billion to invest in a lottery of that scale. But what we are doing is looking at a smaller scale lotteries, if you like, which would be more akin to a raffle. And I've got to be mindful of the complications there with that. So yes, you'll see in the final version of the strategic plan from the feedback is to more sharpen our focus onto a lottery. In the draft version you might have seen there, with using the members to help me, is come up with ways that we can identify funding streams and make investments. But it is a good point. Yeah. What are young veterans seeking from RTSL or RSL at New South Wales, given these veterans are the nucleus of the 450 competitor veteran charity? Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I think when I took on the role, I obviously engaged with people in my own cohort and much younger, and we've done a number of workshops with current serving people. And if I take an example of the current serving, they did not know what the RSL did. They thought the RSL was a club, and younger people don't necessarily associate the benefits of camaraderie in a club, and certainly don't like the association necessarily with poker machines, palmies and alcohol. So that's why we've seen this proliferation of other charities. However, recognising what I've said around what we can do, I think it's a question now of convincing those people what the RSL does stand for, what we can do, and engage with them. And in the model that we've proposed, of course, is, let's take Swiss 8 as an example. Swiss 8, an online charity, if you will, who have an app for wellness. You know, you can follow that to set your diet, your exercise regime. Does the RSL have one of those? No, we don't. Could we develop one? We could. But why develop one when there is a good one? So we can then say to a veteran that we know, oh, have you thought about connecting onto this? And that's what we can do. I think over time we will see a contraction of these other charities, particularly if we can demonstrate what we're proposing in this plan to change the way we think and change the way we can focus on the younger generations who want to participate in activities, have fun, and also want to help others. And a lot of people say to me, John, there's nothing in this plan for the older members. Well, the argument I have is that if we get younger people, we can look after those older people. We can go pick them up and bring them to an event. We can actually engage with them. We can bring them up and check if are they okay. We can support them, and that's what we need to do. I must admit, I get a little bit tired of the views that there's nothing in here for older people. Of course, we've got to respect those people, the founding fathers, if you will, of the RSL. And one thing else I'd say is that you see in the final version of the plan an intention to invite Vietnam Veterans Associations and other service organisations to join the RSL. I think there is too many of these organisations that have the same purpose, and the RSL's strength in terms of its numbers and influence around convincing changes to government policy and the like can happen. My case in point is that Joint Transition Authority, which I spoke about. Oh, there's a person I know is on here. Many of our other service support organisations are national. Do some of the RSL functions need to be national, regain position, cost benefit scale? Absolutely, Richard. That is definitely the case. I think if we look at the strategic plan, what we're proposing is to get RSL New South Wales to work as one. Then effectively we can then look at a national organisation. Most other large charities, as you've obviously identified, operate at a national level. The federated model is dead. And we need to head in that direction strategically, in my view. But as I said, at the moment, we've got a very fragmented RSL in New South Wales. If we can work together, delivering locally, we're going to be in a much stronger position to move there. Some programs absolutely best run nationally. For example, the Veterans Employment Program, which the federal government generously funded recently, is a program we're rolling out nationally now. And for RSL New South Wales, it be delivered out through us service delivery organisation, RSL Life Care, /RSL Defence Care. And that's an example, again, of making it a national program, but delivering it locally. So I hope that answers that question. It's very important that we recognise that. If this support all veterans, whether a member or not, why should our members continue to be members when they could be entitled to any support without being a member? Absolutely. Our charitable purpose is to support veterans. However, what we offer as membership needs to be rethought, because not only does the strategic plan say it doesn't cost anything to be a member, that's one point, but more particularly is if you wear the badge, it points out the fact that you're there to help others. You're demonstrating being a member of an organisation that stands for veterans, and it stands for helping veterans. And by and large, if you look at the younger generations, that's what they're looking for in terms of they want to be a volunteer, they want to help others. It's a huge change, and I think culturally it's a real challenge for us, because up until the mid-70s, of course, the club and the sub-branch was one, and you joined a club for a benefit. Both a financial benefit and other benefits. So now we've got this situation where the sub-branch is a charity and the club's over here. The club, in New South Wales is not a for-profit entity, but it is about giving benefits to members, where of course the sub-branch we can't. But so what is it? What do we stand for? And what the strategic plan is saying is over time we move to this model where as a member, the benefits you're obtaining are around giving, it's about recognition. And one point I didn't go to, which probably I should have done in that conceptual diagram, of those other 2 dot points that the sub-branches do, is commemoration. There's no doubt it's not about wearing the badge and setting up a table for fundraising. If we look at it in that context, it's about the fact is that the RSL is the custodian of those major commemorative events like Anzac Day. And the strategic plan says we've got to build on that strength, because what we're seeing now is a proliferation of these other ESOs taking over those commemorations, because the younger generations are engaging, for instance, on Soldier On, where they will say their driveway dawn service is what the new RSL, what the new Anzac Day will be about. Now we've got to turn that around and say, no, that is a custodianship of the RSL, and we wish to strengthen that relationship and within our communities. So I forgive, actually I should have mentioned that when the concept around commemoration is very important. But fundraising in the future as a charity will be challenging. There's no doubt. We've seen that through the bushfires, when we've seen a lot of scrutiny about fundraising, and quite frankly I think the public now are getting concerned around, is one charity for every 400 Australians now. It's very tough, and that's why those other ways of income sources will be important for us. Okay, why would a 30-year-old veteran join a sub-branch or any other organisation with an average of 80 years? Well, a lot of those 30-year-olds, if I take my son, who's a bit younger than that, he wants to help others. That's one thing. The other thing is that there's an opportunity here for leadership. I think what we need to understand is the younger people can learn a lot from the people who have been in the league for a long time, and we've got to hand over a considerable amount of resources and assets to be managed. There's some benefits in learning how to do that, but more particularly if we can get a group of younger people who want to come in and have fun. The opportunity for us to have fun is extraordinary. And I think we've also got to change the way of thinking and modernising what we offer from the perspective of the younger people, particularly in relation to activities and what we stand for. Because there's nothing better and more satisfying than volunteering to help others. And what I'm finding in the younger generations, they are happy to do that. But we've got to get the mass to do that. We've got to stop this old-fashioned thinking that we have. And that's not necessarily a criticism, it's just that change is difficult, and particularly around culture. So I think we can do it though. All right, have we got any other questions? No, I'm being told by the producer to wind it up. Western Australia just moved into their new Anzac House this week. Very similar to Queensland in some ways. They don't have the clubs. You're probably aware they don't have poker machines in WA. South Australia, arguably underpinned by a significant funding stream from Queensland and other sources, operating in conjunction with Queensland Same with Tasmania, so probably less to comment on there. I just don't have the knowledge. I hope that answers that question. Can RSL New South Wales promote the Australian Defence Veteran pin across multimedia so that it will be more recognisable and more effective? Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. We can do that. Yep. Good point, and that's something we can put on our things to do list. No problems with that. We're probably aware that those members listening in, we've only recently started putting our toes into the social media area, and Mon's been with us just on a month, or so now. Oh, Jesus, give me 2 months, and we'll keep progressing that. We are asking members to pay $35 for the privilege to be a volunteer. It seems to me to be an issue. Yeah, well, that's why the plan proposes 0 fees. It's been interesting though, some people don't agree with that. I'll be interested on the views of listeners regarding that. We do have an obligation to pay a capitation fee to RSL National, but essentially out of that $35 this year, it's proposed from a previous decision that half of that will go to sub-branches. But you're quite right. You're paying $35 to have the privilege of wearing the badge. You do get a magazine and support, but at the same time, it's a good question to ask and certainly should be debated. Most particularly, though, as I said, the strategic plan proposes no fees. To encourage succession planning of new talent and a younger demographic, can RSL New South Wales give affiliate members the same status as other members? Oh, that's a very contentious point. Affiliate membership came about, my understanding, because there weren't service members to fill executive roles in sub-branches, for instance. So that's one point. However, it's become clear to me that there are a number of affiliates that are, if you like, have a relationship to the Defence Force, either through marriage, through family and the like, and there's some arguments there. And I think that's something that should be raised. And certainly I don't have a view one way or the other about that, but it's something that, again, it's a matter for the members to decide. I think what we need to be mindful, though, is that charitable purpose around the benefits and things like that. So we've got to be conscious of that. But to have the volunteers that I've seen around the state is extraordinary. I was last week I was with the day clubs coordinators, and to see that group of people and what they do to help is extraordinary. But they were very senior Australians as well, and there's no one coming in to replace them. So again, a challenge, but I think this is what the strategic plan's about, is to change the look and feel to make sure we can attract that younger demographic, as you say. All right, how am I going there, Mon? Have I got other questions? That's it. I've done it. All right. So look, please don't hesitate to send an email in on that address you saw on the website if you've got any other questions or comments. Extraordinary time. Oh, no, I've got another one. Not the 3 pillars of the League: advocacy, welfare and commemoration. Therefore, the strategies of the team will be identified under one of these pillars. Yeah, there's many ways you can skin it, I guess. It's interesting about advocacy because, let me put it this way, even not that long ago, the reason why the RSL was heard was by virtue of its 100,000 members. And it was that politicians and the like would listen because of that. And there was a few strong personalities that some of us might be familiar with. The world has changed. Just recently, the tragedy around veteran suicide, for instance, a mother of a person who tragically died that way was able to get 300,000 signatures on an e-petition. That e-petition opened up not only ministers' offices, but prime ministers' offices. So the days of having to have members to advocate is questionable. However, I think is the strength is the association of the RSL name, and by virtue of our presence right across the nation. And that's how we can hit that pillar around advocacy from the lobbying point of view. What was the other pillars you spoke about? Just sorry. The welfare and commemoration. Yeah, welfare is an interesting thing because, again, the world has changed. we're still do in most sub-branches called welfare officers. Unfortunately, various legislations has put a very strict definition around welfare and who's qualified to provide it. So again, there's a nuance and change in there about wellbeing officers who are doing essentially what our welfare officers are doing now, but without the requirement for a certificate or a diploma qualification to make those hospital calls or to make those calls to veterans and support them. So that's the, and commemoration I've mentioned, and you'll see about the pillars being slightly different in the final version of the plan, but we have picked up the feedback from the members around that. Commemoration is critical. It's one of our key goals, there's no doubt about it. We are the custodian of the Anzac tradition in many ways, and while I've mentioned these other charities that are starting to take over commemorations, I think it's important that we reassert that role and remain strong and associate our brand with those commemorations in the future. If one of your slides I saw there was sub-branches won't be compelled to contribute to the financial model, what happens to those sub-branches that decide not to support this model? Well, I'd like to think that they all will in time, because they'll see the benefits of working together, underpinning the values. We're all part of the same organisation. But as I said, I think it's a question of not compelling, but making them feel like they want to. Obviously, there will be issues in terms of a fair way of contributing to the funding of things like the strategic plan and things if they are unable to contribute that way. That said, I think there's times that those difficult decisions will have to be made. It's a question now that the board meeting this month, I'm compelled to provide the final version of the strategic plan. As you've probably heard tonight, I can't present to the board a way it can be funded. The final version will probably, the CFO is actually working some sums now, probably be a bit cheaper than the $20 million of the current draft plan, and it will be phased. I've come up with a way of phasing it so the board could make decisions to do tranches of investment for the future. But like I said, I think it's up to the members now to decide, do we work together to have a strong future? Because that's where our strength will come, by working together. If we remain fragmented, regrettably, I think that unfortunately we won't be able to do these strategic things, and certainly we won't be able to invest in the future like we'd want to. So it's up to the members. We've set our course there for a strong future. But if we're unable to make that compelling for those sub-branches, that's their decision. It's a democracy, and I need to respect that. But there is an option there for the future. It's up to us now to say, do we want to pursue that? Okay. Any others? Okay. No, look, no more questions, but that's terrific. Look, I really appreciate those questions tonight. We've got a record of them, so I'll make sure we've looked at the things that are particularly new ideas that have come through to see if we can make further changes, as I said, to that draft plan. But look, extraordinarily big thank you from me for participating tonight, and don't hesitate to reach out if there are any other calls or concerns. And Mom's telling me, a webinar recording will be available on the website too. So don't hesitate to look that up if you want to go around again, but I appreciate it. And social media, that would be great. Okay, so thanks everyone, please stay safe, and thank you again for attending this evening. Good night.